Okay, so this story comes from the internet. Someone named Zobafin. That's what they go by, anyways. And the title of the story is "I grew up in a haunted, demonic house. It's been abandoned since we moved out." I don't often talk about it because it's scarred me. Just talking about it freaks me out. But here we go. I was about 9 years old. I'm 27 now, for reference, and my parents decided to move out of their small apartment complex, rented a house in Brisbane, Australia. We couldn't afford much, so it was cheap and a very old-looking house, and nothing so bad that my dad couldn't fix it up. At least that's what he thought. Keep in mind, the owner of the property lived in another area pretty far away, so it was hard to get into contact with him. Once we moved in, there was some strange thing that caught our attention. There was a big, gross and tacky-looking rug in the kitchen with weird brownish-red blotches. Looked like old blood stains, so we thought this has got to go. We rolled it up and chucked it out. The property had a big backyard with acreage of land. There were a lot of trees. On these trees, at least many of them, there were for some reason, horseshoes nailed to them. Horseshoes nailed on trees all over the property. One horseshoe was even nailed to the wall inside the kitchen. Again, we thought, no, this is weird and creepy. It wasn't until years later that I looked into it and found out that apparently hanging horseshoes was meant for good luck. They were supposed to get rid of negative energy, but we didn't realize this at the time, and after taking them down, we went through many years of bad luck while living in this house. At first, apart from the house looking creepy and old, there were no physical signs of anything paranormal. But as a kid, I loved playing outdoors. I would have a backyard with lots of land. This was pretty fantastic at first. Soon enough, being a kid that plays in the dirt, I started to find things under the dirt. I found clothing buried in random parts of the property. My mom would occasionally see little bits of cloth sticking out of the ground too. Being curious, we would dig them out, and it was always clothing of women or children. Sometimes even the odd shoe here or there. My parents didn't seem to care too much. My dad was a skeptic. They always had some excuse for why stuff was there. They'd tell me not to worry about it and change the subject. The house was kind of lifted off from the ground so I could go under the house and play. One day I found a bone buried up there. This is when my mom realized this was just too many coincidences and told my dad. She wanted to report it to the police, but my dad just said something like, "Don't waste your time, it's most likely old cattle bones." So we listened to my dad. Soon enough, the paranormal stuff started happening. My dad always worked at nights, leaving me and mom in the house alone. In the living room, we had one computer. We had dial-up internet back then, and it was referred to as the family computer. I would usually stand behind my mom while she was using the computer, and I would just watch. While I watched, I felt a hand grab me on the shoulder from behind. I turned around thinking it was my dad, home early from work, but there was no one there. Another night, I was in my bedroom. It was the middle of the night, and I was asleep, but I was woken by the sound of a toy from my shelf. And I had a Furby, a little toy. Could sense someone was in front of it and start talking. I heard it activate, and it started rambling nonsense. If you ever had one, you know what I'm talking about. However, my bed was nowhere near the shelf. Never activated on its own before, and the rambling just kept continuing. So much I couldn't go back to sleep. So I wanted to go turn it off. I walked over to the Furby and picked it up. It had stopped. Now I checked the switch on the bottom. It was already set to off. Eventually, I started having nightmares. The same nightmare every single night. It was always so vivid and real. The dream was of me tied up with rope on an old bed with springs and no mattress. It was my bedroom, though the room was different. No light bulbs or electricity. A single bedside table with this old-timey candle on a plate. It almost seemed like from a different time period. I would try to yank free from the ropes, kicking and trying to get out. I would wake up in a sweat, have 3 red marks on my stomach, almost like 3 scratch marks. Now, I've looked into this. Scratch marks often mean demonic possession. It was mentally exhausting. I couldn't handle being in my room anymore. I was maybe around 10 years old at this point, and I was too scared to talk about it to my parents. I didn't tell them exactly what was going on. I just kept insisting on sleeping in their room. I don't have any memory of this, but my parents have since told me when I did this, I would often sit up in the middle of the night, point at the window, and start screaming, saying things like, "Don't let him in," and "Shut the windows." Windows were already closed, but my mom would get freaked out about this. Dad would say something like, "He's just having a bad dream, go back to sleep." Over time, my mom would start hearing walking on the floorboards in the middle of the night while Dad was at work. But nobody was in the house. The ceiling fan would turn on by itself, even when the switch on the wall was off. Strange things like this would happen. Eventually, things began to wrap up, and the bad luck turned into a living nightmare. Our family started to grow. My baby brother was born, and after some time, he was starting to walk. It was a great memory, but it quickly was ruined. Shortly after learning to walk, out of nowhere, he was bedridden. He wouldn't sleep, he suddenly couldn't walk anymore, and he wouldn't eat. He had to be taken to the hospital, and the doctors weren't sure what was wrong with him. They did tests, and one doctor even suggested he was faking it. They did x-rays and couldn't find anything wrong. I think my parents weren't satisfied with that answer. How or why would a little child fake something like whatever was wrong with him? We took him to another doctor, and they found a rare cyst on his spine. They had never seen it before, only heard about it in textbooks, and it was close to bursting. Could have paralyzed him for life. After months of being in the hospital, we were finally getting back to a normal life, as normal as you can have in a house with these strange events. We decided to install a chicken coop, raise some chickens. With the size of our backyard, it felt like a good use for it. However, it seems this house had other plans. We always locked up the coop before night, but we woke up one morning to see the door wide open. All the chickens were gone. We had 10 of them. We found them shortly after discovering the door was open, at least part of them. All the chickens had their heads hacked off, no bodies found, just the heads all laid out neatly in a straight line in our yard. That seemed to have been the final straw. My dad was the one to call the police. No suspects were found, and despite struggling for money, we finally moved out of that house. The nightmares have stopped. It's been over 10 years since we moved out, and the house was never rented out again. It has begun to decay, and weeds are taking over most of the property. I've dabbled in haunted house investigations over the years, but that's one place I'm never going back. I did find one update to this post. It says, "I've shared the story before, and as a result, apparently some kind of investigation was opened, revolving around the house. I was visited by police officers asking questions. They told me they'd contact me if they got anything new. The only thing I learned was that before we rented it, it had been rented out to a biker gang."
That is crazy.
Wow.
That is really crazy.
Why didn't they just hang that horseshoe back up? Man,
I don't know. I guess he said, apparently he didn't learn that until after they'd already.
like they thought about it later, like we removed those horseshoes and
When they started mentioning the horseshoes, I was like, you probably shouldn't take those down. That was definitely put up for some sort of protection ward by somebody.
Captain Hindsight on South Park is what came to my mind when you said all that. Oh man, that's terrifying.
Yeah, and so there's actually a couple different beliefs about the horseshoes. Some said to have them kind of like turned up, and some of them have turned down. Both of them involves containing luck of some kind, good luck. And if it's facing down, the good luck will pour down and act as a like a barrier. So some people say to put them up during certain times of the year, and then turn them down and put them on your front door or any entrance to your house. So there's a couple different, beliefs around positions of the horseshoes.
He was having very vivid dreams.
Yes.
As kind of like almost the start of things. And it seemed to obviously it escalated, I think, to the point of where what happened with his younger sibling, correct?
Yeah, for sure. And, the dreams, he describes them very, very particularly. And it definitely seems like, if there was some kind of like negative energy involved with the house, it was definitely, seeping over into his dreams for sure.
Kind of hear that. That happens a lot of times with people. But I think that, like I just said, the real crazy thing was really, I don't remember how old his younger sibling was, but it sounds like developmentally he just completely stopped and actually, like, he couldn't walk anymore. That's just, terrifying.
Yeah, so it seems like, because he mentions that he had left the house over 10 years ago, so it seems like they were there for many years. I would say probably like 5 years or so. So yeah, it's hard to say how old his younger brother was.
Yeah, that was crazy. As soon as we were talking about the clothes too, I was just like, man, why didn't you call the cops then? It sounds like something bad would happen there, and you want to make sure that they know that you were not involved with this.
Yeah, definitely he wanted to know what was going on. He wanted to know more. He's kind of like, even at, I don't remember his age then, but he was investigating, right? He's like digging under his house.
Yeah.
I mean, I assume for a reason. So obviously had an inkling and I want to say a knack for this because it was kind of forced upon him, but it seems like he was completely aware and trying to get to the bottom of it a little bit, even though later, more came to him, obviously.
Yeah, it definitely seemed that way. He also, started doing, like you mentioned there at the end, that he started doing like haunted house investigations. So I imagine he's probably pretty, almost obsessed to some degree with the whole thing after having personal experiences like that.
You'd have to be, and to do something like that is just...
Evidently, fear is not a factor for you.
Fear is never a factor, Joe Rogan.
Yeah. I mean, to be like, have all that crazy stuff happen to you, then still pursue it. He may have been still afraid, but he wanted answers nevertheless.
Oh yeah,
definitely. That's crazy.
Look, so I found this bone down there. What it was.
Jeff Townsend Media. CG, good night.
And the question is, do I stay here?
Will you be back? Are you gonna come back? Will you be back? Are you coming back?